Today, we're diving into a story of what can only be called a betrayal. It's happening in the Indian state of Meghalaya. Now, on the surface, it's about broken promises and basic infrastructure. But when you dig deeper, it's really about fundamental human rights being denied to hundreds of thousands of people every single day. And this quote, wow, it really gets to the heart of the issue. The argument here is that when a public building is inaccessible, it's not just some design flaw. It's a deliberate act of separation. It's a form of exclusion so systemic it's being called apartheid by design. Now that is a heavy charge, and it perfectly frames what's at stake. And look, we're not talking about a small handful of people here. The estimates are between 1.5 to 2 lakh people in Meghalaya. That's up to 7% of the state's entire population. These are citizens who are effectively being made invisible, literally locked out of public life by concrete and stairs. The sheer scale of this is just staggering. All right, so first up, let's frame this for what it is. This isn't an accident or an oversight. We're talking about a crime of exclusion. We're going to explore how an entire system can fail its own people, not through one single mistake, but through years and years of sustained inaction. Now, to really get what's going on, you need to understand this one core idea, the social model of disability. It's a total shift in perspective. It says the problem isn't a person's body, it's not their impairment. The problem, the thing that's actually disabling, is society and the environment we build. An inaccessible building is what creates the disability by putting up a barrier. This idea is absolutely central to everything we're about to see. So with that in mind, let's look at the law versus the reality. Because, there are rules for this stuff. There are laws on the books. But in this section, we're going to see the massive, glaring gap between what the law says should be happening and what's actually going on the ground. And, this problem isn't new, not by a long shot. The first major law was passed way back in 1995. Then, a much stronger act in 2016 set a hard deadline. All public buildings had to be accessible by 2021. And yet here we are, years past that deadline, and the sources say widespread noncompliance is still just the norm. This timeline shows a broken promise that's stretched on for decades. This slide just lays it out so clearly, doesn't it? The law promises accessible buildings. The reality is these inaccessible fortresses. The law promises a 4% job reservation. The reality is a huge employment gap. The law promises inclusive education. The reality is that schools and colleges are physical barriers themselves. The gap between promise and reality isn't a crack, it's a chasm. So how bad is it really? Well, in this next section, we're just going to follow the evidence. We're going to look at the cold, hard facts from a ground-level audit of this exclusion. I mean, the audit wasn't looking for anything fancy here. They were checking for the absolute basics, things you just assume are standard. We're talking ramps, usable toilets, lifts, proper signs, parking, service counters you can actually reach. These aren't luxuries. These are the fundamental building blocks of access. And the results? Well, they're just devastating. Let's start with the most basic thing of all, a ramp. The audit found that a staggering 95% of government buildings were non-compliant. 95%. This visual just says it all. Access is the rare exception, not the rule. And it's the exact same story for another basic human need, accessible toilets. 90% were either completely missing or just didn't work. This isn't just an inconvenience. This denies people their dignity, and it makes it impossible for them to participate in public life for any real length of time. Okay, let's switch gears to employment. The law says that 4% of government jobs, that's around 4,000 positions, should be held by persons with disabilities. The reality, only about 750 of those jobs are actually filled. This chart shows a deficit of over 3,000 jobs. It's systematic exclusion from economic opportunity, plain and simple. So this all leads to the big question, right? Why? How could a system fail this completely? In this section, we're going to unpack the common excuses and get to the real reasons behind decades of inaction. It turns out the failure is baked into the system. First, it's a classic case of out of sight, out of mind. Because their own offices are inaccessible, policymakers hardly ever interact with persons with disabilities, so the problem just stays abstract to them. Second, there's a serious lack of technical know-how among architects and engineers. And third, maybe the most important piece of the puzzle, there is zero accountability. The law exists, but it has no teeth, so nobody gets punished for breaking it. So let's talk about the excuses. You hear this one all the time from officials. It's just too expensive, our budget is limited. And on the surface, that sounds kind of reasonable. But let's look at the facts. The reality? That excuse just doesn't fly. Incorporating universal design from the very start only adds about 1 to 2% to the total cost of a new building. That's it. So claiming it's too expensive, it just doesn't hold up. This isn't an issue of cost, it's an issue of priority. It is a choice. All right, the next excuse is even more troubling. It's the argument that this only affects a small minority, so we have to prioritize the needs of the majority first. This line of thinking basically pits citizens against each other. But here's the perfect rebuttal. First, fundamental human rights are not up for a popular vote. They belong to everybody, no matter the numbers. And second, and this is the really brilliant part, universal design benefits everyone. Ramps are great for parents with strollers, for elderly people, for somebody with a temporary injury. Good design is just good design for all. So if the system is broken and the excuses don't hold water, what's the path forward? In our final section, we're going to look at the path to justice and how citizens can start demanding some real accountability. So what can actually be done? Well, the source material lays out a pretty clear game plan. This isn't about waiting around for change. It's about forcing it. Step 1, take all this evidence and file a public interest litigation. Use the courts. Step 2, launch a public campaign. Create a shame map of inaccessible buildings. Step 3, follow the money. Find out where those disability budgets are really going. And finally, make this a non-negotiable political issue at election time. Which brings us to our final thought. What we've seen today shows that every single inaccessible government office, every school without a ramp, every hospital a person can't enter, that's not an accident. It's not an oversight. It's a political choice. It's a conscious decision to exclude a part of the population. And the question that leaves us with is a really simple one. Is that acceptable?